They tried to break him, but they didn't realize his soul was made of titanium and fire. Witness the incredible resilience of a human spirit that refuses to be contained or controlled. Hit subscribe today and find the unbreakable power within your own heart.
The lock code I'd set 3 years ago still worked. That should have been my first warning that something was very wrong. I stood in the parking lot of my own bakery at 6:37 in the morning, key fob in hand, staring at a door I no longer recognized. Someone had painted over the sign. My name, Elena's, was gone. In its place, block letters in forest green read Hollow Creek Provisions. Through the front window, I could see new shelving, new display cases, my custom tile countertop, the one I'd laid by hand over a long weekend the summer I turned 28, was covered with butcher block. I hadn't been gone that long. 8 months, 243 days on a remote agricultural research station in northern Montana, no cell service past the first ridge, satellite internet that worked maybe 4 hours a day. I'd taken the contract because it paid enough to clear the last of my business loan and put 6 months of operating cushion in the bank. I'd taken it because I'd trusted that the two people holding power of attorney over my personal affairs, my mother and my ex-husband Derek, would keep things running until I got back. I pressed my palm flat against the glass and looked inside for a long moment. Then I walked around to the back entrance, punched in the same code, and the door clicked open. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from before I go any further. I want to know how far this one travels. My name is Elena, and I'm 31 years old. I built Elena's Artisan Bakery from a $1,200 stand mixer and a farmer's market booth when I was 26. By the time I left for Montana, I had a brick-and-mortar location in Denton, a wholesale account with 2 local grocery chains, and 4 part-time employees. I had built that business the same way I did everything. Quietly, without asking anyone for help, with the kind of patience that comes from knowing no one is going to hand you anything. The back office still smelled like flour and cardamom. That was the only thing they hadn't managed to change yet. I sat down in the chair that used to be mine, in front of a desk that still had the scratch I put in it, moving a filing cabinet. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. My mother arrived at 8:15 with a tote bag over one arm and a coffee from the shop across the street. Not mine, I noticed. And she stopped cold when she saw me sitting there. The color went out of her face in a way I'd never seen before. She recovered fast. My mother has always been good at recovering fast. Elena. She set the tote bag down on the corner of the desk. You're early. We weren't expecting you until next week. My contract ended ahead of schedule, I said. I kept my voice even. The growing season ended early. They let us out 8 days before the original date. I paused. I tried to call. The number I had for the bakery line wasn't working anymore. We changed the business number, she said. It made sense too, with the transition, I repeated. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down like she was the one arriving at a meeting she'd scheduled. That was my mother. She had a gift for making you feel like a guest in your own life. Derek and I have been talking about this for a while. You know the bakery was struggling before you left. It wasn't struggling, I said. The margins were thin, Elena. You know they were. She folded her hands on the desk. Derek found a buyer. A very fair buyer. Someone who wanted to expand into this market and needed an existing location with established foot traffic. They made a strong offer, and we felt it was the right decision for the family. I looked at her for a long moment. Outside, I could hear someone unlocking the front door. New staff, I assumed. Coming in to open a bakery I had built and no longer apparently owned. You sold my business, I said. We protected the family's financial interests, she said. Derek was in a difficult position. You know about the loan. I knew about the loan. Derek had come to me 8 months before I left for Montana, sitting at the same desk, telling me he'd co-signed a private business loan for his brother Marcus that had gone sideways, $40,000. He said he had a plan. I had told him I couldn't cover it and that he shouldn't have put his name on a loan without telling me. We were divorced by then, had been for 14 months, but he still found ways to treat shared history like shared liability. How much did they offer? I asked. My mother's eyes moved to the tote bag. A small, involuntary tell. The sale price was very fair for a business of this size. How much? $220,000. I had a wholesale client who had valued the business at $340,000 the previous spring for a potential partnership agreement that never went forward. $220,000 for a going concern with established accounts and a loyal customer base was not fair. It was salvage pricing. It was what you paid when you knew the seller had no leverage and no time. And Derek's brother's loan? I asked. That was settled. Yes. So $40,000 of my $220,000 went to cover a debt that had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with this family, my mother said, and her voice finally sharpened into the tone I'd been waiting for, the one that meant she had decided the conversation was over and the verdict had been delivered. You were unreachable for months, Elena. We did what we had to do. The papers are signed. The transfer is complete. The new owners take full operational control at the end of the week. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and picked up her tote bag. I think it would be gracious if you were willing to meet with the new owners and offer a transition period. Show them the supplier relationships, walk them through the sit back down, I said. She blinked. I had used my outdoor voice. I almost never used my outdoor voice. She sat. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, the same jacket I'd worn on the drive down from Montana, 16 hours straight with 2 gas station stops, and I set a document on the desk between us. It was a single page, certified copy notary stamp, dated 11 months ago, 6 weeks before I signed the Montana contract. My mother looked at it. I watched her read the header. I watched her read it again. I restructured the business before I left, I said. Elena's Artisan Bakery, the sole proprietorship, doesn't exist anymore. It was converted into an LLC 11 months ago, Elena Grace Holdings LLC. I am the sole member. The operating agreement was filed with the state. The business bank accounts, the wholesale contracts, the lease, everything was retitled under the LLC before my departure. My mother's mouth opened slightly. The power of attorney you and Derek hold is a personal POA, I continued. It covers my personal bank accounts and my personal medical decisions. It does not extend to a separately registered business entity. An LLC is a legal person, Mom. It has its own identity. Neither you nor Derek has any authority over it. You had no authority to sell it. You had no authority to sign anything on its behalf. She was staring at the document like it might change if she looked at it hard enough. That means the sale contract is invalid, I said. Derek's signature on the transfer agreement isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The buyers don't own this business. They own nothing. And if they wired funds based on a fraudulent transfer of ownership, that is their problem and is Derek's criminal problem. The silence in that office was total. Outside, I heard the new employee turn on the espresso machine, the familiar 3-beat hiss of the steam cycle. That machine had taken me 4 months to save up for. My mother found her voice. You can't. Elena, the money is already gone. Derek paid Marcus's lenders. The rest went into an account. You cannot unwind this. The money is a civil matter, I said. The fraudulent conveyance of a business entity is a separate matter, and it's not a matter I have to unwind alone. I had made one phone call from a rest stop outside Billings at 2 a.m. My attorney, she had been awake. She was always awake, and she had listened for 6 minutes and then told me to come straight to Denton without stopping at the bakery first and to let her make 3 calls before I arrived. I had made one detour. I needed to see the sign with my own eyes. Now I picked up my phone and said to single text, I'm here. You can come in. My attorney, whose name I will not include here because she is a private person who does not enjoy being in stories, walked through the back door 90 seconds later. She was followed by a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as an investigator with the county DA's Economic Crimes Unit. He had a notepad and the particular kind of stillness that meant he had done this many times before. My mother stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. What is this? She said. It wasn't a question. This is what happens when you commit wire fraud across state lines, I said. The buyers wired funds from an account in Colorado to a business account in Texas based on a sale contract signed by someone who had no legal authority to sign it. That's federal jurisdiction, Mom. That's not a family dispute anymore. The investigator asked my mother if she'd like to call an attorney before answering any questions. She said she didn't need one. He wrote something in his notepad. My attorney and I both noted that she had said that voluntarily, in front of a witness, and in a tone that suggested she was still operating under the assumption that she was in charge of the situation. She was not. I left them in the office and walked out into the front of the bakery. The new employee, a young woman, early 20s, who had nothing to do with any of this, was arranging pastries in the display case. Pastries that were not mine. The display case was mine. I introduced myself. I told her gently that there were some complications with the ownership transfer and that she should probably call the people who had hired her. She looked at me, looked at the gray-suited man visible through the office window, and pulled out her phone. Derek arrived 20 minutes later. He must have gotten a call from my mother because he came in already talking, already building his version of events on the walk from his car. He had the particular energy of a man who had convinced himself he was the protagonist of a story in which he was also clearly the antagonist, which is, in my experience, the most dangerous kind of person to be legally entangled with. Elena. He spread his hands as he came through the door. Reasonable, measured. The face he used when he was trying to manage me. I know this looks bad. It looks exactly like what it is, I said. Your mother and I had to make a judgment call. You were unreachable. The business was profitable, I said. I have 18 months of P&L statements that say so. The margins were improving quarter over quarter. My accountant can speak to that. I nodded toward the office, where my attorney had joined the investigator and where my mother was now sitting very still and very quiet, as can the DA's office, apparently. He saw the gray suit through the window and his whole body changed. The reasonableness drained out of his face like water out of a bathtub. What was left underneath was something uglier and more honest. The look of a man calculating how far he'd fallen and whether he could climb back out on someone else's shoulders. You called the DA, he said. My attorney contacted them. I contacted my attorney. You contacted a buyer and forged a business transfer. The sequence of events matters, Derek. I had power of attorney, he said, his voice going tight. It was completely legal. You had personal POA, I said. My attorney has a copy of the document you signed. You want to read the scope clause together right now, or would you prefer to read it with your own lawyer? His jaw worked. I watched him do the math. The math was not adding up in his favor. The buyer's already paid, he said, dropping his voice. $220. It's done. The money's moved. Even if you win some technical legal argument, getting that reversed takes years. Years of litigation, Elena. While this place sits in limbo and your wholesale accounts dry up and your employees, if you even want to call them that at this point, move on. Is that really what you want? I had expected this argument. Derek was smart enough to go straight to attrition. He knew I didn't have the resources for a long legal fight, or he thought he knew that, because the Elena he remembered had built this business on a $1,200 mixer and a lot of very thin margins, and that Elena couldn't absorb a 2-year legal battle. He didn't know about the contract. The Montana Research Station had paid well, not Montana State Employee well. Federally funded agricultural research well, with a hardship differential for remote posting. I had lived for 8 months in a bunkhouse where there was nothing to spend money on, and the direct deposits had stacked up untouched in a personal account Derek had no visibility into. I had gone to Montana to clear my business loan and build a cushion. I had done that and more. I didn't tell him any of this. That's a very confident position, I said. For someone standing inside a building he doesn't own, talking to a DA investigator who has been listening to this conversation for the last 4 minutes. Derek turned. The gray suit was standing in the office doorway. The investigator said, Mr. Hollis, I have a few questions. Derek looked at the investigator, then at me, then at the document on the desk that my mother had not stopped staring at since I put it down. He looked at his own hands. I want a lawyer, he said. That's a good instinct, the investigator said. You'll want to make that call from outside, please. They moved him toward the back. He went. He didn't look at me again, and I noticed that the way he didn't look at me, because some part of him knew that if he did, the story he'd built in his head about this being a practical decision made by reasonable people under difficult circumstances would not survive contact with my face. My mother, sitting in the office, called my name once as he passed the doorway. I stopped. I did what I thought was best for you, she said. Her voice was different now. Smaller. The authority had gone out of it, and what was left sounded almost like the woman who had taught me to make pie crust when I was 7 years old, pushing my hands into the cold butter, telling me to feel for the texture. You were so far away. Derek said the offer was good. I thought you thought I wouldn't find out, I said. Or that by the time I did, it would be too late for it to matter. She didn't answer. That was its own answer. You have my cell number, I said. You've had my cell number, I said. You've had it for 8 months. The satellite internet worked 4 hours a day. I checked my messages every single one of those 4 hours. I picked up the LLC document from the desk. You didn't call because you knew I would say no. I walked out. The buyers, a husband and wife from Colorado who had been looking to expand a specialty food retail operation, arrived at 11. They were not bad people. They had done due diligence on the location, the foot traffic, the supplier relationships, the one thing they had not done, and my attorney made sure to note this with the particular calm of someone who has delivered bad news many times and knows how to do it without pleasure, was verify that the seller had authority to sell. The wife sat down on the customer side of the display case and put her head in her hands. Her husband stood next to her with his arms crossed, staring at a point on the floor. We paid $220,000, he said, to no one in particular. I know, I said. I'm sorry you're in this position. I genuinely am. You have significant legal recourse against Derek Hollis and against my mother as his co-signatory on the transfer agreement. My attorney can refer you to someone who handles civil recovery. I paused. The business itself was never theirs to sell. That doesn't go away because money changed hands. The wife looked up. How long have you been planning this? I converted the business to an LLC 11 months ago, I said. I did it because I was going somewhere remote for a long time and I wanted the business to be protected in my absence. That's just good asset planning. I didn't plan for any of this specifically. I looked around the bakery. The tile counter covered with butcher block, the new shelving, the sign outside with the wrong name on it. I just made sure that what I built couldn't be taken from me without my signature. She nodded slowly. Something in her expression shifted, the shock and fury giving way to something almost like respect. What happens to the business now? She asked. It's mine, I said. It's been mine the whole time. The investigator's follow-up took most of the afternoon. My attorney stayed with me through all of it. Derek's attorney, someone he'd found on short notice, a decent enough criminal defense lawyer from 2 towns over, arrived by 3 o'clock and spent an hour in the parking lot on the phone before coming inside. At 4:15, Derek came back into the bakery without his attorney and found me behind the counter. I was pulling butcher block off my tile countertop, one section at a time, because I needed something to do with my hands and because that tile had taken me 4 months to save for and a full weekend to lay, and I was not going to look at it covered up for 1 more hour. He stood on the customer side. His good suit was wrinkled now. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, genuinely lost. The DA's office is talking about wire fraud charges, he said. Federal? I know. Marcus's money is gone. The lenders took it immediately. I can't get it back. He paused. Elena, I need you to tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you gave verbal approval, something. I set down the section of butcher block I was holding. I looked at him across the counter I had laid by hand, that he had tried to bury. I never gave you verbal approval, I said. I never gave you any approval. You know that. I know. His voice was very quiet. I know I didn't have your approval. I'm telling you, I need you to say that I did. There was a long silence. When I left for Montana, I said, I drove myself to the airport. You know that. You know I didn't ask anyone to drive me because I didn't want a long goodbye. I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes before my flight because I was scared to be that far from this place for that long. This bakery is not just a business to me, Derek. I think you know that. I think that's actually why you chose it, because you knew how much it hurt. He didn't say anything. The answer is no, I said. I'm not going to lie to a federal investigator to protect you from the consequences of what you did. I'm not going to do that. He left. I found out later from my attorney that Derek's brother Marcus had relocated to Phoenix 6 weeks earlier and was largely unreachable. The $40,000 he had borrowed, that had started all of this, was unsecured and mostly spent. There was no recovering it. Derek was facing potential federal wire fraud charges, a civil suit from the Colorado buyers for recovery of the purchase price plus damages, and a separate civil action that my attorney filed on behalf of Elena Grace Holdings, LLC, for tortious interference and fraudulent conveyance. My mother, who had signed as a co-party to the transfer agreement, was named in both. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired and a little hollow, and glad in a quiet way that I had laid that countertop properly the first time because the tile underneath the butcher block was completely undamaged. The new shelving came out over the following weekend. I rented a truck, and my friend Josie, who had worked for me before I left and who wanted her job back, helped me haul it to a donation center across town. We stopped at a diner on the way back, and I had the first real meal I'd eaten sitting still in probably a week. "Are you okay?" Josie asked. I thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. "I will be," I said. The outside sign went back up on a Tuesday. I painted it myself, the same deep blue it had always been. The letters taking me most of a morning to get right. The wholesale accounts came back. One of the grocery chains had actually missed me. They sent an email the week I reopened that said simply, "Glad you're back. Same terms?" Same terms. The Colorado couple found an attorney who specialized in fraudulent real estate and business conveyances. Their civil case against Derek moved faster than anyone expected, partly because Derek's attorney eventually advised him to cooperate in exchange for reduced federal exposure. The buyers recovered most of their purchase price within 14 months. I know this because the wife, whose name was Carrie, came into the bakery one afternoon about a year after everything happened and bought a loaf of sourdough and a half dozen of the cardamom morning buns I'd started making after Montana, where I'd had a lot of time to experiment with recipes in a shared bunkhouse kitchen on cold nights. She didn't introduce herself at first. I recognized her when she turned away from the counter. "How are you doing?" I asked. She turned back. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her. "Better," she said. "Mostly better." She looked at the tile countertop. "That's beautiful work." "Thank you," I said. "I laid it myself." She nodded. Like that explained something that needed explaining, and picked up her bag and went out the door. My mother called for the first time 6 months after everything. I let it go to voicemail. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she was sorry, and it was a particular kind of sorry that still contains a hinge of justification somewhere in the middle. "I'm sorry, but you have to understand the position we were in." And I listened to the whole message standing in the back of the bakery early morning. Before Josie arrived, with flour on my hands and the smell of the first proof rising around me. I didn't call back. Not that day. I left the possibility open in the way you leave a door unlocked without opening it. Not an invitation, just an absence of a lock. There's a difference. Derek's federal case resolved about a year after the incident. I won't go into the details because some of it is still technically in process, but I'll say this. He is no longer practicing as a financial consultant, which had been his profession, and the bar associations tend to take fraud convictions quite seriously, regardless of the final charge. The bakery is doing well. Better than before in some ways. The time in Montana, the months of recipe testing in a remote kitchen with limited ingredients, had forced a kind of creative constraint that turned out to be useful. The cardamom buns became my most requested item. I added a savory line. The second grocery chain account doubled their order 6 months after I came back. I didn't go back to Montana, but I did do something I'd been putting off since the business started. I incorporated a proper estate plan, a revocable living trust for my personal assets, a clear and limited POA document that I gave to my attorney alone with explicit scope language that took up 2 paragraphs. I had my attorney read it back to me out loud in her office while I followed along, and when she finished, she looked up and said, "This is unusually thorough." "I've had a learning experience," I said. She laughed, which is the only time I have ever heard her laugh in a professional context, and I count it as one of the more satisfying moments of that entire year. I'm telling you this story not because I want you to be angry on my behalf, though I understand if you are, and not because I think my family is uniquely terrible. I think what happened to me happens in 100 variations to people who work hard and build something and make the mistake of trusting that the people closest to them are playing by the same rules. They're not always. So you build the fortress correctly, and you register the LLC, and you read the scope clause on the POA, and you keep a certified copy of every document in a fireproof box, and also in a cloud account your mother doesn't know about. You do all of that not because you expect to be betrayed, but because you understand, at some point, that the things you build deserve the same protection you would give to anything you love. And then you go lay the tile yourself, because if you do it right the first time, it will still be there when you get back. If you've ever built something from nothing and had to fight to keep it, leave a comment. I read every single one. There's a version of this story where I came home to nothing, where the sign was wrong, the countertop was buried, the accounts were transferred, and I had no recourse because I'd trusted the wrong people with the wrong documents and hadn't thought carefully enough about what could go wrong while I was 800 miles away with 4 hours of satellite internet a day. That version is entirely plausible. It happens to people all the time. I think about that version often, not with fear, but with a kind of sober gratitude that I happened to make one good decision 11 months before I needed it. What I've come to believe is that outcomes like mine don't come from luck. They come from a long chain of small choices made before the crisis arrived. Choices about how carefully you read a document, how precisely you understand the limits of the authority you give to others, how seriously you take the quiet work of protecting what you've built even when no threat is visible on the horizon. Elena didn't outmaneuver her mother and her ex-husband in that office because she was cleverer than them in the moment. She outmaneuvered them because she had done the unglamorous work months earlier in a lawyer's office, reading scope clauses out loud, asking questions that felt overly cautious at the time. That is what I mean when I think about intelligence as a practice rather than a trait. It is not the quick comeback or the dramatic reveal, though those things make for a satisfying story. It is the willingness to think 2 steps ahead when life is calm. To ask, what happens if I'm wrong about this person? Before you have evidence that you are. To build structures that hold even when the people around you don't. The moral failure in this story belongs entirely to the people who chose to exploit an absence. That is a choice, not a circumstance. Derek and Elena's mother were not desperate people with no options. They were people who looked at someone who was working hard and far away and decided that her absence made her fair game. That kind of thinking has consequences, not because the universe enforces justice automatically, but because actions create evidence. Evidence creates legal exposure, and legal exposure has a way of catching up with people who assumed they'd never be held accountable. And Elena, who spent 8 months in a bunkhouse testing cardamom ratios and missing her tile countertop, came home and held them accountable. Not out of revenge, out of the simple understanding that what she built deserved to be defended with the same energy she'd used to build it. The lesson I carry from her story is this: build carefully, document everything, and never confuse the people who love you with the people who will protect what you've made. Sometimes those are the same people. Sometimes they are not. The wisdom is in knowing the difference before you have to find out the hard way. If you built something from nothing and fought to keep it, you already understand what I'm talking about. The tile is still there under everything they piled on top of it. It always was.